Thank you so much for coming to Talking Cello, man. It's great to see you. It's been a long time. How are you?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Even here from the distance, and yeah, looking forward.
What are you up to these days? What are you working on?
It's such an interesting period because sometimes you have just long periods of waiting and not knowing exactly what's going to happen, and sometimes something just pops up out of the blue. Like last week, I got this opportunity to record here in Berlin a TV show with Daniel Hope for Arte concerts, and it was a wonderful platform. Daniel Hope organizes now this concert series, Hope at Home, and the third season of his series he called out Europe at Home, and with each show he wants to present another European country, and I got the honor to present and represent my dear home country of Romania. That was a wonderful experience.
Sounds nice. How do you keep in shape in these long periods of waiting? Are you very disciplined? Do you like go every day like you have a concert regularly, or you just keep it down, or how do you do it?
I think all of us needed a moment of deflation because we've been so busy, traveling on the road for such a long time that I think that the beginning was actually even healthy in a strange way. But I think the longer these lockdown conditions and restrictions went, everything started to get scary. And I think I can speak for all of the musicians. We had, both positive and negative moments. There were a lot of moments where we just sort of lost hope for. It's not only about what happens in the next few months, it's about rather bigger picture and the further future and the future of classical music in general. But what I can say is that I think the passion for what we do is the fire that keeps us going. Unless you really love classical music, you love playing an instrument, it's really hard to enjoy this type of profession because it's a tough one. You have to make so many sacrifices, from a young age. And, judging from this perspective, I think the fact that we're kind of used to putting in effort, to going on through stage rise, through all sorts of emotion, maybe helped us also go through in this period. Yeah, I'll admit I probably haven't practiced as much as before, but yeah, I did learn some new repertoire that I was supposed to play this year. Yeah, but it was also very, very interesting when I got the invitation to go back on stage. I had so much more pleasure into putting in the work for every preparation of the concerts, because also there were maybe fewer, but from this perspective you just took every single opportunity, and you treated it with the same respect and intensity. And yeah, it was really enjoyable to then be again on stage and feel like 100% prepared.
I can relate completely to everything that you're saying. In a way, it's funny because when we were students, at least me, I didn't have also any concerts, but I didn't feel like this feeling of what do I do now, because there was always like, I don't know how, I always had this super motivation every day practicing 7 hours, and no matter what, doesn't matter if I have a concert, if I have, which I didn't. And now I feel a little bit sometimes like, what should I practice today? So this is I'm battling this a little bit. How were you when you were a student? How did you practice a lot? Did you have a lot of motivation? Did you always know that you wanted to be a soloist?
Um, the moment I properly started practicing was around 12, 13 when I changed my cello teacher. My teacher Ani Marie Paladi from Bucharest. She was just absolutely amazing. I was always considered, that talented kid, but there are always some problems or something going on around it. And then she made me practice focusedly. She gave me the right information to make any sort of progress. First of all, in the instrumental playing, I learned so many refined things about cello playing, about being relaxed, about being natural. And from that point on, I didn't feel like I had to be pushed to practice because I knew exactly what I had to do, and I also felt the need then to practice because I noticed that the results were coming right away. So from that point on, I think it was just a kind of a constant progress and constant stage of practicing, and of course, how it is, preparing for competitions, and when you're studying and you're still accumulating repertoire, and but what I can say about coming to Berlin is I probably learned even better to the psychological aspect of the preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow Jens Peter Mainz, he's really great with this because on one hand he's extremely calm, but on the other hand he might also put you in some sort of situation where you just have to come to the lesson not even warmed up and play everything through. Mm-hmm. Plus all of these internal auditions where everybody listens to each other. I wasn't used to that before, and I think it was a really beneficial experience from this point of view to then come also prepared and to have some sort of confidence even going on stage.
And how did you deal with this pressure, starting from like the colleagues listening to you in the lesson, all the way up to the competitions and to the performing on stage? Did you struggle with this a little in the beginning? Now, never?
Yeah, even before moving to Berlin, I always try to put myself in some sort of psychological bubble before going on stage. I was lucky enough to not feel stage fright or to feel sort of calm while playing on stage, but that hour before the concert or even the whole day sometimes can be extremely stressful. You feel like you just want to quit it all, right? I just try to put myself in a bubble and really not think about anything else that's happening around me, and even focus purely on the playing. Because if you try, if you are aware that you are extremely nervous, then your brain is basically working towards those thoughts instead of working towards the playing. And if you somehow manage to concentrate purely on the playing, mm-hmm. and think about just what you have to do, I think that's a way to try and feel calm, because this stage fright, it's very tiring. So when you walk already on stage, your brain cannot concentrate properly, not only because of the nerves, but because it's put so much effort into, and it releases so much energy with these thoughts. Yeah. I mean, competitions are always, I think that for me, it was the most grueling thing I could ever go through, but then they prepare you for life. After going through such an experience, the stage and performance life does become easier. And of course, then comes the experience, and yeah.
One of the many things that I admire about you, and I could really see in Tchaikovsky, is like your level of concentration. It feels incredible, at least from outside. Did you ever have to work on that? Is like a conscious thing? Is that something that you train, or did it come naturally?
What I think also happened in Tchaikovsky was I had a lot of will to just show my playing in the best way possible. And with that came loads of internal pressure. I think I remember even going through the first two rounds of the competition. I literally thought I was going to die. I mean, poor Naoko, my pianist. Yeah, what she had to go through with, well, not only with me. There were some other people she also played with. I think these sort of very stressful moments are like a catalyst. They either break you completely down, or they raise you up in a way that you cannot, not even yourself, you cannot expect. You know, it surprises even you. I mean, you also know, like in for example in sports, it's kind of the same thing happening with Olympics. You know, some people just crumble under pressure, and others surprisingly rise to the occasion, but they even surprise themselves. I really wanted, again, I didn't want to win. I just wanted to present myself in the best way possible on that, huge platform. And yeah, another aspect that is very important is while you are on stage, try to be as calm as possible. I try to sort of double myself and try to talk to myself while I'm playing. Like, breathe out right now. It's all gonna be fine. You have to be relaxed, shoulders down. That's always extremely important, and so on. And I think music performance requires this sort of doubling yourself in a weird psychological way.
So when you are playing, you are like observing yourself from outside, kind of.
Looking yourself from above. Yeah.
I see. And does it happen? It's something that you try to do in every concert. Doesn't matter if you are calm or nervous, or you do this when you are a bit more nervous, or.
I mean, pretty much so. I think it's a principle. Even when you. For example, when we are studying, a lot of times we were being told by our teachers, no matter the instrument, to listen to the room. You have to take yourself out of the process of playing and doing something else on top of it.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Yeah, definitely. It's very good to know when you are projecting enough, know when you're playing with an orchestra, you know how the sound is coming back, guys. I wanted to ask you in a particular technical thing, maybe you can help me. I just played again Rococo, and this stupid first variation, man. When I'm practicing, I always like, why is this difficult? I mean, I play it and I feel fine. As soon as I go on, even in rehearsal with orchestra, I'm fine. I go on stage for the concert, and suddenly I like an idiot. I don't know why. Like suddenly in the concert, I'm like super doubting everything. I feel super uncomfortable, super naked. How do you work with this variation? Can you help me, please? Give me a little tip.
I always say that the first variation is, in a way, more awkward to play than the last one, right? I think number one is because you're completely naked. I mean, you are used to practicing alone, but then going on stage and just hearing a few notes from the orchestra and some pizzicati, that's really scary. And I think number one, it has to do with the way that variation is written, that you just become automatically scared. No way of going around it. And again, I'm coming back to that process of looking at yourself from above. Like the moment that variation starts, you will be tense no matter what. And this is when I just try to bring everything down, breathe out, shoulders down, elbows as relaxed as possible. And and another thing is that I think in that particular variations, many people, they try to hit the intonation very well in all the positions, but then they become a bit tense. And for example, by the time you hit that high point, your hands are so incredibly tense that the sound doesn't come out naturally anymore and it becomes forced, for example. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of also accepting the fact that it is a scary spot.
Yeah. So definitely. So whenever you have these kind of spots, you are focusing on physical feelings, like this, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, pretty much
Okay.
so.
Yeah. Also, so this kind of thinking, you do it in, if there is a technical passage, whatever it is, if you find it difficult, you will think like, okay, so relax elbow or shoulder or here. All right. Okay, that's very useful.
No matter how much you practice a passage, you have to practice it intelligently.
Yeah.
Especially at home. And that process of preparation is also extremely important, to always be relaxed while practicing. And another thing that I sometimes do is also imagine myself that I'm already on stage while doing a run through at home. You just think about, okay, right now I'm on stage, everybody's listening, it's a full house and it's scary, and now I have to play this variation. You know, even Perlman said something like that. In a I don't know, he was giving some masterclass and the student was saying, it was so much better at home. And then he said like, oh, well, look, honey, think about the way I sound when I practice at home.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that.
It's true, but that's yeah.
That's a great one. How was the change between the change from student life to concert life? Was it very sudden? Was it gradual?
Yeah. The thing was that I was still a student and I was still studying with Mainz when my concert life already started. So I was kind of in between worlds, and well, I don't wanna talk bad things about my university in Berlin, but to be very honest, besides my cello teacher, the whole student thing was kind of a disappointment. And they had this system where you're not even put together in classes for theory lessons. So there was no feeling of community. You just choose, whichever seminar you go to. So from that perspective, I could even say that the last time I felt like a student was in high school. Yeah, I mean, of course, we know the cello class, we get along together, we're very well, but not necessarily with this whole university. And yeah, it's from this point of view, I think there was even no transition, because I did not necessarily feel really like a student. Yeah.
All right. Okay. And I wanted to ask you about Mainz. Mainz was here also in Talking Cello. I love him. I think he's a great cellist and great teacher. What is one of the things that he taught you the most, or he repeated more in lessons? Something that you think often of what he taught you?
Always play to the bridge.
Good one.
That's a vital piece of information that that you really have to follow, especially if you have to play with an orchestra. There's just no chance of going around it.
It's true.
No, but jokes aside, I learned a lot about, I would say, older music. Everything about style, about Bach poems. He's almost a geek in this sense, and I love learning Beethoven sonatas with him.
Now, this thing about sound production is very true. It's such an easy fix to just play closer to the bridge, but to some students to understand this is a bit hard. No, sometimes when I teach a little masterclass here and there, I notice that people are afraid to go down there for some reason, and it's very necessary to play on stage.
Yeah, if you can talk about differences between cello schools, I would say the German school is very much focused on this type of sound production. Also, one of the reasons why so many German cellists are successful.
Yeah, maybe. I want to ask you also about preparing a competition. I mean, many people who watch this show, they are quite young and they want to prepare a competition. Do you have any advices? How did you prepare yours?
Goes first of all with a choice of repertoire. In Tchaikovsky, I'll just give Tchaikovsky as an example. I mostly played pieces that represented me and that I also had played for quite a while. I think like the Shostakovich sonata I've been playing since I was 15. And Rococo was actually the very first concerto I ever played with orchestra on stage. So I think number one is choosing the right repertoire that represents you and that you also feel comfortable with. That's extremely important. I mean, there is an advantage in Tchaikovsky because you have more freedom of choice with the repertoire in comparison to, say, ARD or other competitions. Yeah, I mean, the preparation process is, again, you have, of course, you have to keep in shape, but the process starts in a way even years ago. So if you're thinking about applying to some competitions in a few years, now this is the time to properly practice, to have a solid technical base, and to feel extremely comfortable. Of course, when you prepare for a big competition and you have a lot of repertoire, you have to put in the hours of work. But at that point, I'm not sure how much really further you can get with your playing. That's why the most important aspect in the few months leading up to a competition is the mental preparation. As I said, putting yourself in a bubble, also trying to do as many run-throughs as possible. Yeah, I remember back when I was in Bucharest, I used to practice a lot. But I was almost even too scared to do run-throughs while practicing because I knew something, there will be some mistakes happening and I would be frustrated and so on. But you need that process of run-throughs. You need the process of even playing a house concert, playing for friends before. And anything like that is helpful. And for example, let's say how the holds are going to look like. Now we can Google everything, right? Mm-hmm. Just picture yourself, close your eyes, practice, picture yourself in that hall.
Yeah, that's very smart. I even also did that of looking the hall in Google and try to imagine myself on stage.
Yeah.
All right, man. It's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this little talk. It's super interesting to hear you speak about all of this, and I hope people will enjoy it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. My great pleasure, and all the best to all of us.